Welcome to another episode of Shrinks Chat. I'm Monica Burton.
I'm Annette Ryder, and we're here with our famous guest, Damon West. He is a motivational speaker and best-selling author and parolee. So welcome, Mr. West. We're honored to have you here today. We both read your books and love your message.
Annette, Monica, first of all, thank you for spending your time with me. The most valuable, the most precious resource we have is our time. And you're willing to spend it with me today so I can be useful to other people. So you're a gift to me. Thank you for the opportunity.
Well, it's an honor. What an amazing story. We were just sharing with you off the podcast here, how you led us to tears with your book, how brutally honest you are in the book about telling your story and the change agent, and just how hopeful and motivational it is at a time like maybe we needed a whole lot in this pandemic and what we're going through.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you know, I tell people all the time, I tell them that Einstein quote that God doesn't play dice. So nothing really happens by accident. And I look back on my life and nothing happened by accident. Just the fact that I had the ability to articulate what I saw, what I've been through, and not just in the verbal way of communicating it with speaking to people, but being able to write a book and tell that story. No one taught me how to write. I mean, my dad was a writer. I read a lot of books growing up, and I read a lot of books when I was in prison. And I think all of that stuff culminated to put us to that moment where the change agent came out. And the change agent, it's one of those books I think will go down as a guide that people turn to understand, you know, the world of addiction for both the addict and the family members of the addict, the people, because addiction affects everybody in this country. It doesn't matter if you're the addict, the family member of an addict, the friend of an addict, the victim of an addict, or the taxpayer just paying into an overburdened criminal justice system that has no idea how to handle the disease of addiction. Addiction affects every single one of us. And it's something that's in front of our faces. America really needs to change its attitudes towards two things in life. That's mental health and substance abuse. So anytime I get the opportunity to really dive into those worlds and try to change hearts and minds about what mental health and substance abuse is, I'm all in.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Well, you're singing our song, man.
Right.
You're
Did it hit the keywords right? Did it hit the keywords?
You did.
Yes.
You did. I have to say, as I was reading your book, so the two books that we'll be talking about today are The Change Agent and The Coffee Bean. But as I was reading your book, The Change Agent, I couldn't help but think about it, several different things. And from my perspective as a mom and also as a therapist reading your book, there's so many different aspects that I think touch on every single part of our lives. As a therapist, we get to hear people's most intimate story about their struggle, about their sorrow, about their heartbreaks. And I do feel privileged that someone, chooses me or us to really help them in these really difficult parts of their life. Mm-hmm. In fact, my first job out of graduate school was working with juvenile offenders and their families and creating a program for their families. And one of the parts of your book that really made me miss that group, because in my opinion, that was the most rewarding job, is I would have birthday parties for these boys. And there's a few of them that never had a birthday party. And when you talked about there was a guy that hadn't had a hug in 22 years. Mm-hmm. I remember that feeling of being with these kids that didn't have really anything, and their families, and some of their family members had to turn them in because of what they were doing.
Yeah.
And in just these moments, I thought, as I was reading your book, I thought about your mom and your dad and your family, and just your story of not allowing complacency, not staying stuck, not caving, not giving in, and continuing to push through. And how we see this in our therapy offices, but also as a mom trying to get my kids to say, even when you fall down, pick yourself up. And, I feel so, honored to meet you and so touched and blessed to be able to read your book.
Oh, Monica, I appreciate that. And I came across so many men that I was locked up with that did not have the resources that I had. I mean, I had it all, yo. I mean, I was in, so I was a sociology major when I got my bachelor's in back in 1999 when I graduated college from a bachelor's. I was a sociology major. And so living in prison was like living in a giant sociological petri dish. It was like waking up in a lab every day, right? I mean, yeah. And actually, aside from the threat to your life and the security aspects and the deprivation of freedoms, y'all would probably love being inside of a prison. I mean, just like it's like you people watching and understanding behavior in a different world, because you take away some of the safeguards, the rails of society, and that's prison. You know, it's like people survive sometimes on their instincts. You know, and it's really an interesting world when you're around other people that the lizard side of their brain takes over. Right. But in prison, I realized that there's like five variables that kind of determine that don't determine, but they have a significant impact, whether or not you're going to be impacted by the criminal justice system in a negative way. There's five kind of variables I saw in there. Poverty is one of the main ones. Lack of education. Lack of education is big in there. You know, most of the people, I think the average education there is like 7th grade. Lack of a family. Most of these men that I was locked up with didn't come from 2 parents. They didn't have a 2-parent system. They had 1 parent, you know, if that. And then race. Race is a very big factor when you're looking at incarceration. A white guy like me represents the lowest amount of people in there. But, you know, on the outside in the free world, white men are the most prominent, or white people in general. But the 5th one was substance abuse. And that's the one where I wasn't an outlier. The other 4, I was an outlier. But substance abuse, that's how I ended up inside of a maximum security prison, because substance abuse, about 80% of the people that are locked up have substance abuse issues. And this is something that doesn't get as much of attention as I think it deserves, because I also think substance abuse on the front end, how people end up going to prison around substance abuse. A lot of crime, most crime, I would say, is around substance abuse, you know. But on the back end, when people recidivate, the recidivism number, why people go back to prison, a lot of that substance abuse. Like I get to go into the parole offices here in Texas, and parole is how they keep you. You can stay out of prison on parole, and you live on the streets and you serve out your sentence out here. For example, I'm on parole until the year 2073 in Texas. So I got a little bit of time left on supervision, right? I mean, I'll be 98.
A
little bit. But parole lets me come in now and talk to these men and women that are coming out of prison right off the bat. They still smell like prison when I get them. They've been out of prison for a week, maybe 2 days, some of them. And I walk into this room. There's typically about 25 or 30 of them in a new boot class. And first thing I ask, I said, hey, who in here is an addict? And about 4 or 5 hands usually go up. And I take these. So what I've done is I've printed out the list of all the AA, NA meetings in our area, in our region. And I give them a list of where all the meetings are, the times they meet, the addresses, how to get there, and everything. It's a thick packet. And I tell everybody in the room, these people just got the roadmap for how to stay out of prison, because they've got a roadmap on how to find their program of recovery. And if they will work their program of recovery, then good chance is they'll never go back to prison. And man, all the hands start shooting up, and you get all these addicts now, because everybody wants one of these packets of roadmaps, because that's what I've identified as the reason why a lot of people go back to prison. Because I'm an addict, y'all. And today I have a program of recovery, a 12-step program of recovery that I'm going to work for the rest of my life, because I know as an addict, I can get better, but I'll never get well. I'm never going to beat this stuff. So I've got to figure out how to live with it. And a program of recovery has allowed me the resources to live with my addiction, because I think differently than other people. When I explain addiction to people that have never heard of, don't understand addiction, I tell them that addicts, we have a 3-part thought process. We have a thought. Say the thought is to drink or do drugs. And then that thought will become an obsession in our minds. We obsess about it. We sit there and just think about it. And like on a Monday, if we think that, hey, Friday, the weekend, I get here and I can drink. An addict will sit there and think every day that the thought will consume them Monday through Friday about their drink they're going to take on Friday. That's what addicts do. And the third part of the thought process is we make that obsession physical. We put it in. We put in the drink. We put in the drug. But a program of recovery allows us a way to get that obsession out of our head, to get that thought out of our head before it becomes something physical. And so I explained it to these men and these women that, hey, look, the chances are that most of the people in here, 80% of us are addicts. We have substance abuse issues. So let's figure out how to live with that. Let's figure out how we're going to live in the fact that we're addicts. We're not going to get well, but how do we live like an addict and still be free and have everything we want to have in life? And I'm telling them the program recovery is how you're going to get there. So listen, not everybody has the same opportunities in life. I tell people this all the time. I had tremendous parents. My parents came to see me over 150 times when I was in prison. And a lot of my success, I think, is connected to the fact that I never felt like I had both feet in prison at one time ever. I always felt like I had one foot in, one foot out. I was straddling two worlds because my parents pulled on me from the other side and refused to let me become a part of that prison. But I had to put in the work. Everybody's got to do their own work. And so that's what I hope my message kind of conveys, that, look, no one's going to do the work for you. You have to put in the work, but it can be done. It can be done. No matter what your situation is in life, you do have choices, and those choices determine your outcome.
I think what you got from sports too, from your life in sports and what you learned from being an athlete, it seems like you've adapted and also then were able to take into your recovery and into prison, like that message of you can't win every fight, but you must fight every fight. Like, I think that, I constantly have used sports analogies in therapy for the last 25 years because everybody watches some sports. And I'm like, listen, he strikes out and then he gets back up and he makes it to first, and then he gets back up and then he hits a grand slam. And then he goes back up. Like, a major leaguer has to be able and have like his worst day and his best day in less than a few, 15 minutes away out there on the mound, right? Like out there at bat. And so you have to fight every fight, and you have to fight the fight right in front of you, which is that whole one day at a time, one moment at a time idea. And that is really hard to live in because our instincts of our brain don't want to do that. They want to worry and wonder and commiserate and ruminate and have, that's what the brain wants to do, because it's trying to protect. The lizard brain's trying to keep you alive. And those are things that the lizard brain work hard to keep us doing. And that's where I think when you pull out the fight every fight, and then literally you fought every fight in prison. I mean, there were sometimes I listened to your book on Audible as I was walking around and living my life. And sometimes I just had to put a pause, as a mom, just broke my heart that you were in another fight in prison, getting beat up by somebody. But so yours actually turned into something literal, and that's hard to hear.
Yeah. And look, I mean, that's, you hit on something very big, and that is the whole idea that sports is a metaphor for life, because we learn so many life lessons in sports. And I believe that, this is taking it deeper to another project I'm working on. I believe sports will get us there in America on other issues too. I mean, and let's talk about what you talked about first, about the whole idea about sports, about getting knocked down, getting back up. You take just about any sport there is, and you have to have failure to get to your goal. You have to, because there's not a football team out there that just gets the ball and scores every time. They fail sometimes. They got to punt, they throw interceptions, they fumble. That's just football. And then you look at a women's sport, look at softball, like you said, you strike out sometimes. Everybody can relate to a sport of some kind, because the lessons about teamwork, you're on a team. Right. And that's one of the things that we're lacking right now in this country, I think, is the cohesiveness, that we're all on the same team. And what leads this into another era of my life is that it's coming out in May or June. It's a book I wrote called The Locker Room. I wrote it with a guy named Stephen Mackey. He's a real big curriculum guy here in Texas. Stephen asked me, he said, "Hey, Damon, can we write a book about racism?" He said, because he works with a lot of high school athletes and coaches. He said, there's such a big disconnect, Damon. He said, the locker rooms are broken in America right now. Can we write a book about racism? And I'm like, no, we can't write a book about racism. But we could write a book about racism and the cancel culture. Because if you're going to talk about getting rid of one, let's get rid of the other one too, because the other one's gone too far too. Cancel culture has gone too far too. So we wrote this book that's called The Locker Room. And the locker room is that sports metaphor, because, right, so teams that win games, teams that are successful, they have a locker room. That's their sanctuary, man. That locker room is a place where the standard is the standard. No one is above the standard. Where your success is my success, and the rules are the rules, and everyone has a voice, and everybody's equal in this locker room. Teams that win, Now, in a broken locker room, in a dysfunctional locker room, you don't have those things, and the goals aren't the same. They're not the shared goals. Every man for themselves. Those teams don't win games. And right now, America doesn't have a locker room. And in fact, the original name of the book was called America Needs a Locker Room, but we went with the name The Locker Room because I think that the locker room kind of brings it all in. And it's a coaching fable. It takes about an hour to read, but the book is about this team that's dealing with this fallout from one of the players that makes a racially insensitive comment. And now the locker room is broken and divided. And it takes these conversations in these locker rooms, and these conversations have to happen on two levels. And this is what we're lacking in America. Right. We need to have people that are willing to be humble and learn. Mm-hmm. And that's the people that need to learn about what racism really is in America and the effects of it. And a lot of that time, that's white people. We need to be willing to listen and learn to what Black and brown people are telling us about racism, because really racism is about the imbalance of power. That's what racism really is. That means one race has more power over other races. They can write laws to affect where you live, the kind of schools you go to. And for the most part in America, white people have had that power. So the one rule, the one caveat, the one thing about this book is that it's going to take humility from one side, and it's going to take grace from the other side. Because if you have one side willing to listen and learn, they're coming with humility, willing to listen and learn, then the other side is going to have to be willing to teach these humble people with grace. And that's what I think that Black America is going to have to do for these white people that come willing to listen and learn, is you're going to have to teach them with grace. And grace it's a tricky thing, because grace always costs the person giving it more than it costs the person receiving it. Right. But when we have humility and grace in this country, we're capable of so much, because now we're on the same team. And in this book, The Locker Room, the team has to come in this locker room and have this uncomfortable conversation about what's gone down. But they sit there and have this conversation with humility and grace, and at the end of it, they're better for it. And they see that the diversity of their team is really the strength of their team. Everybody's differences really make them stronger. But we don't have a place like that right now in America. We don't have a place where humility and grace can come to the top. And until we do, we'll have problems with the racism and cancel culture stuff. And so this book, I think, is going to come out there. Hey, let me tell you what I did too. So
this is so exciting. It sounds like it sounds like a therapist office. That's where I would tell you where humility and grace live in America right now. And every day in my office, in Monica's office, and in a lot of therapists' office out there. I mean, we are in the midst of those conversations that you're trying to have in the locker room every single day. In families, they're divided more than ever. In couples,
yeah.
I
can only imagine.
One's voting for one party and the other's voting for the other party. And I mean, it's just like we've talked about this on the podcast, but yes.
Well, it's interesting.
A beautiful analogy for it.
It's interesting you're saying that about that particular topic, because that's the story I was about to tell you. So look, I'm very middle of the road. I live a life where I've got this message of positivity, and I want to speak to everybody's kids. I want to speak to everybody in America. So I don't choose sides when it comes to political issues in America, because I'm going to cut off half the country if I do that. If I open up, and what is my opinion really worth, right? Who cares about what I personally think? I want to impact lives. I want to be part of the solution instead of part of the problem. And that's where this came in when Stephen and I finished this book, because this book, we have to thread the needle on this topic, because this is the most divisive topic, right? We're writing a book about racism and the cancel culture in 2022 America. So I said, Stephen, look, I don't want to blow my platform up. You don't want to blow your platform up. Let me field test this book a little bit first before we even take it to sell it to a publisher. So I took this book to 5 coaches that I know, 5 high school coaches that I know in America that are hardcore Trump people. They wear MAGA hats at practice. These guys literally wear their MAGA hats at practice. And I gave it to these 5 guys, and I said, hey, individually, tell me what this book makes you feel where you are in America right now. Just tell me your feelings. I want it raw. What did this book make you feel?
Right.
Then I took the book and I gave it to 5 high school coaches that I know that are real big time BLM type guys. They wear it on their sleeve. For sure the BLM movement is very big for these guys, right? And I said, hey guys, tell me what this book makes you feel like where you are in America right now. Give it to me raw. Y'all, Monica, Ned, every one of these guys, all 10 guys came back and said the same thing individually. oh my God, this book is amazing. When is it coming out? I need this for my team. Tell me how I order this book. Where can I get this book? It's going to change the game.
Right.
We threaded the needle. You've got both sides of the spectrum saying, hey, this book
Great
is
book.
great. And we went into the whole thing about what defining racism is. We gave people a definition, kind of like what I just told you. But we also in there and said, hey, look, but the cancel culture is not good. The cancel culture suffocates any kind of conversation before it even starts. So we wrote a book that threaded that needle, that walked that line down the middle. And I don't think there's any other book out there like it in America right now. It's going to be big.
Well, I can't wait to read it.
Yeah, we're going to want you back.
Yeah, we'll have you back.
Yeah, I'd love to come back.
Because that's been one of our favorite topics to talk about too.
I think that as I'm listening to your talk, I'm thinking about a couple of things, and I'll try not to be too long-winded, but to me, the thing that I've been talking the most about is actually a term that I use individually with couples, and it's, are we willing to first listen to understand each other? Because typically we listen to react or respond, which only creates more conflict. And as we're talking not only about, racism and the cancel culture, but also even about addiction, one of the things that I hear the most about is I don't understand it. With it, the families that are talking about like, why won't Johnny just stop drinking? Or why won't, Susie, like she keeps using, cocaine. I don't understand. It's creating all of this, and so in your, I think about sports analogies all the time, but I also think about cooking because that's another one of my passions. But, it's like, what are these ingredients that help people? And to me, it's like both and it's understanding, it's who's our support system. It's also what is the work that you're willing to do. You had these ingredients that came together that did help you. And it still came down to, what is your choice? What do I choose today? And how do I choose to live my life for today? And I think that that's one of the things that when we talk to families, it's like, what are our choices? And how do we approach them first with understanding? Not, this is what I think you should do, but understanding. I mean, part of my frustration, I think, as a therapist is treatment programs for substance abuse. It's like you go in, you get clean, and then you just kind of get thrown back out, which is why I think, especially for Annette and I being family therapists, we see the system. It's not just one person that changes, the system changes. So, all these different pieces, and there is so much anger. There's so much turmoil in our country right now. It is leading to more addiction. People are drinking more, they're using more drugs because they just want to numb out because of all the anger. So or hostility, or whatever you want to call it. So I think it's good to look at, like, how do I approach situations from a place of understanding? Who's my support system? And as we've said in many podcasts, please ask for help. There's nothing wrong with it. It actually helps you, and I don't know. I feel like there's both and there's not one right answer for everybody. It's, what are your choices and how do you choose to live?
Maybe this pandemic is really creating, Monica, as you're talking, an opportunity for that really boiling water.
Oh, yeah.
For us to then experience ourselves. And I mean, we all have pandemic fatigue to some degree. And how do we deal with our fatigue of it?
Well, first of all, I want to tell you, I hear you. I hear what you're saying, because that's the thing about listening, right? We need to be able to listen to what someone says. Somebody asked me on a podcast one time, said, if you could have any superpower, what would it be? And I said, oh my God, to listen. And he's like, well, explain it to me. I said, well, I'd like to be able to listen without prejudice and listen without the urge to want to just respond. Because when we could just listen to what other people are saying, and when we really hear what they're saying, then we can become useful in that person's life. Then we can become part of the solution, and we can learn more about them and what their needs are. We can really hear what their needs are, and we can further this conversation. We can help each other. But until we're listening, none of that stuff happens. And, my father is one of those people that you talk about. They're like, well, the first time he visits me in prison, I mean, he's first time we get to visit each other, touch each other in years, he hugs me and he sits me down. It's like, Damon, why didn't you just move back to Port Arthur with us, man? And why didn't you just leave all the drugs and everything behind and just move back with us? And you could have avoided all of this. And he's looking around the prison. I'm like, well, I was like, well, damn, man. I mean, why didn't I think about that, Dad? I mean, that's a great idea. I cannot believe I didn't just think about just leaving Dallas and just coming home.
Right.
But he didn't get it. My mom got it. My mom's a nurse. She's used to, she understands the disease concept, right? So, but my dad, he didn't get it. And sometimes he'll still ask me, he's like, I just don't get it. I don't understand. But he's not an addict. You know, if you're not an addict, you can't make sense of that. Then you can't make sense of the senseless stuff that goes on in the world of addiction. But I've tried to help. And look, that's something for your listeners to understand. This is my father. I've put him through hell. You know, he's been at the center of this world that I've been in that took me through a life sentence in prison. And I broke into people's houses. And he doesn't even get it on every level, you know? So don't feel like you're inadequate because you can't understand something that's difficult to comprehend. And if you're a listener out there and you're thinking about, man, you know, I'm like Damon's dad, that's okay. That's okay. And it's okay to ask for help. Like you said, Monica, look, the 3 hardest words for people to say, I need help. I need help. It's the 3 hardest words for people to say, but everybody needs help. We're all coming in need of something. And it's about being in a place to offer that need to someone else. There's a good story about this. And I tell this when I'm doing my presentations to certain groups. And it comes from one of my favorite people, Mr. Rogers. I love Mr. Rogers, y'all.
Oh, we love Mr. Rogers too.
Love Fred Rogers, man. But before he was a children's television show guy, he was a Presbyterian minister in Pittsburgh. Right. And he told a story about something that happened. He said he went to a church service one Sunday. They had a substitute preacher that came in that day. And he said this substitute preacher gave a sermon that day. And at the end of this guy's sermon, Mr. Rogers thought to himself, that was the worst sermon I've ever heard. He said, this is the worst preacher he's ever seen. He said, this guy was so awful. He almost put him to sleep. And just as Mr. Rogers was about to turn to this little old lady that was sitting next to him to tell her how terrible he felt like this guy was, he stopped. He bit his tongue because that little old lady that was sitting next to him, she was bawling and crying. She was just a heap of tears. And she turned to Mr. Rogers and she said, that was the most beautiful sermon I've ever heard. She said it was the absolute right thing I need to hear at the absolute right time in my life. And she said to Mr. Rogers, she said, I'll never forget where I was this day that I heard this beautiful man's sermon. Mm-hmm. Mr. Rogers was floored, man. He was like, man, he couldn't even wrap his brain around it because the guy was so terrible, right? Obviously, he was so terrible. But he profoundly impacted this woman's life. You can't deny what you can see. This woman was touched by this man. So he realized that we all must have this power inside of us to impact human life in ways that we can't even imagine. We haven't even tapped into this stuff, right? Everybody has this inside of them. We all must, if the preacher did, right? Mm-hmm. But he learned another very important lesson that day. He learned that while he was coming in judgment, that little old lady was coming in need. Mm-hmm. In need. And so we realize when we understand that right now, this time, especially with the pandemic and the negative effects of that, so many of our brothers and sisters in this country are coming in need. Mm-hmm. What are we prepared to do to meet the needs of these other human beings? Because that's what servant leadership is about. And that's, for me and my addiction and my program recovery, being of service to others helps keep me sober. That's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for people in need. In fact, my prayer, every morning I get up and I say the same prayer. And I learned this prayer when I was in prison and I first got into my 12-step program recovery. And look, I mean, the program recovery I go to is AA. I'm not going to say I don't speak for AA. I'm not a spokesperson for them. These AA people get upset if I don't say those sentences right there, those very things. But I don't choose to live in anonymity. That's my choice because I think that people can see examples of other people and how they've overcome and how they did it. I think that's helpful to other people. And
absolutely.
So I'm not one of those people that hides behind the anonymity because I think people need to see, hey, that guy is flawed. That guy went through hell with his addiction. That guy still suffers every day from his addiction, but look what he's able to do because he's in a program recovery. Maybe I should try a program recovery. So, but I learned how to pray when I got in that program recovery. And I say the same prayer today that I've been saying since I was in prison and I went to my first meetings in 2011. It's a 2-part prayer. It's the only 2 things I ask my higher power for. I get on my knees in the morning and I say, hey, God, Put in front of me what you need me to do today for you. And let me recognize that when I see it, because I don't want to miss that. Amen. I'm off. I'm gone. That's the only thing. I don't need anything else, because now everything I need is in front of me, because I'm going to be looking for ways to serve other people.
Mm-hmm.
And as long as I meet the needs of my higher power meets my needs too. Not my wants, but my needs and wants. That's a whole different conversation.
Right. I love that, the Mr. Rogers story, because it really it lines up with your book that where you, I don't know how many times you say 40 times, like, what is it? Perspective influences perception.
Position determines perspective.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So they were just in two different positions, hearing the same story.
Right.
Yeah. You know, and so often in therapy, I try to remind people, like, what if you were, you know, the version of yourself that wasn't angry about that moment, or that wasn't sad about that moment, or that wasn't mad about that moment? Like, what if as I'm driving down the road and I'm the Annette that isn't screaming at people and lecturing everybody how to drive. And instead I'm the person like, oh my, they must be in a hurry, or go ahead. No worries, peace, right? Like, what if I'm that Annette that day? How does that change the Annette I feel inside? Or if I'm like, what the heck are you doing? Hey, stop it, right? Like, which version of Annette do I want to be, responding to the same bad driving that's happening in front of me all the time, right? And by the way, sometimes I'm the bad driver for any of those out there that I've offended. So sorry, but
no, I'm with you. But what you're saying is so true, because it's the same event. The same event is traffic. The same event is someone cutting you off, a bad driver. But where were you when you experienced that event? Where were you mentally to handle that? You know, maybe you just got, something great happened to you, and this happens in front of you, and nothing can knock you off your perch because you're feeling so good. You got these endorphins flowing through you. But maybe you just got some bad news. Maybe your day is a really crappy day, and then someone cuts you off, and the same event, but where were you mentally to handle that?
Right.
Yeah, it's like that quote, everybody's fighting a battle that you know nothing about, so choose kindness. You know, I think it's, to me, the difference between selfish and selfless. You know, selfishness is covered in addiction. And to be selfless, to give of self through mentorship, through doing things for others, to be kind, to be respectful. I mean, I think it's two different words that have so much meaning behind them, and behavior as a result. You know, part of when I started working with the incarcerated kids, and I even hate calling them, they're kids who got in trouble, but you know, is I decided to show up and give them respect regardless of what they had done. And I know many of them had said, like, you're different.
Yeah.
And the person that trained me, she said, get in their face, bring up what they did, blah, blah, blah. And I just was like, I'm sorry, that's just not who I am. Like, there's no way I can do that. And so to treat people with respect, to me, part of the ingredients, especially with what's going on right now in our world, is respect and love. And I'm not talking about romantic love, but I'm just talking about love.
Sure.
And to approach, because I think what's happened is, the Buddhists say the two primary emotions are love and fear, and everything kind of stems from that. And so, what if we approach each person through the lens of love, and how is that different, including ourselves? It is good to give us some self-love too.
Yeah. I tell people all the time, the opposite of love is fear. I mean, so that's the opposite. You talk about what the Buddhists talk about, the love and fear. The opposite of love is fear. And with all of human behavior, everything we're going to do is the result of three basic instincts that run through our lives: our need for social, our need to be secure, and our sex instinct. The need to want to belong to a group, to a community. We all want to socially fit in. Our instinct for security, financial security, life security, how secure do we feel, and our need for sex, relationships. These are the things that drive us in life, these three basic instincts. And when I work my personal inventory and my program recovery, I've got to figure out first of all, my resentments are the things that are really going to hold me back. And whenever I have a resentment, one of the things I'm looking for is, what role do I play? Because I've figured out that in my life, I don't know about everybody else's, But in my life, I figured out that it's like they say in the big book, whenever I am disturbed, there's something wrong with me. I have to figure out where I am in my problems because I'm there somewhere. I don't know about everybody else. I just talk about I statements. I have found that in my life, every problem that I have, I'm in there. So I play a role in my problems. So for an example, when working a personal inventory, let's say the judge, in my case, Judge Snipes. Judge Snipes is the guy that I used to party with. I thought we were buds and not great friends, but I thought we were better than the way he treated me at my trial. I thought the guy was so heavy-handed and didn't give me a fair shake. And I had this resentment against Judge Snipes for 3 years when I got into prison. I'm like, man, I was still so angry at this man. But then I had to, because I look at what, my resentment against Judge Snipes. Now, look at these instincts that it touches, because it doesn't always have to just touch one instinct of resentment. Mm-hmm. Does my resentment of Judge Snipes affect my social instinct? You bet it does. Going to prison kind of changes your social calendar a little bit, right?
A little bit.
Does it affect my need for security? Yeah, you bet, man. Living in a gated community, that's not the gated community I was thinking about. But I mean, now my security is affected by that, sure. Right. Does it affect my sex instinct? You bet it does, because now I don't have a relationship. I don't have a family. I'm not going to be married to anybody. I'm in prison. So it affects all three of these basic instincts. So my resentment is strong against this guy, right? Mm-hmm. But then when I got into a program recovery, I started working my personal inventory. I plug in Judge Snipes as my resentment, the instincts that it affects, all three. And then the last column, what role did I play? Okay, I broke into people's houses. I broke the law. I committed crimes. And I ended up in Judge Mike Snipes' Criminal District Court 7. Now, if I don't do all these other things, if I don't do the role that I had, I'm not sitting as a defendant in this courtroom. I can't get sent to prison with a life sentence. And that's when I was like, wow, I've been having a resentment against this guy when it was my fault. I played a huge role in that problem. Mm-hmm. And I got to absolve myself of that resentment, because these resentments, y'all, are like poison, man. It's like drinking poison and hoping the other person dies. And it's resentments eat you up from the inside out. And if the opposite of love is fear, the opposite of resentment is forgiveness. Mm-hmm. And we have to get to a point in life where we can let go of our resentments and move on. And every night I try to do this. I ask my higher power when I'm laying down at night, was I a good person today? What did I do to put back in the stream of life? Did I help other people? Was I a good person? But do I owe an apology to anybody? But one of the main things I want to ask my higher power at the end of the day, do I owe someone forgiveness? Because that forgiveness thing is real. We have to be willing. We want to be forgiven for everything we do, but we have to be willing to forgive everything that everybody does to us, especially the people that do not ask for our forgiveness, the ones that don't even acknowledge that they've wronged us. Are you willing to forgive those people? Because we all want forgiveness too. And if you want forgiveness, you got to be willing to give it. It's a two-way street. And so,
well, when you give forgiveness, you kind of get it.
Yeah, you get it. You get
that's how you get forgiveness. You get it to yourself because you become the forgiver.
Yeah.
And then it kind of takes down the wall of whether someone out there at all has done anything wrong to you. They're just living their lives, right? That car just, cut me off or whatever's going on, right? My windows are up. And if I'm yelling at him, I'm in that pain. If I'm giving him ease, I'm in that peace. Which Annette do I want to be? The person in ease or the person in pain, right? That's what forgiveness is.
And that's a great example with the car, because the person driving that car that did that, it's like a resentment that you have. Most resentments that you have against somebody, the person doesn't even know, right? Yeah. And if they find out, they don't care. Because if that person in that car found out that you were so mad at them or you weren't mad at them, they wouldn't care either way. They're driving to get to where they're going to go in life, and they just keep going. Mm-hmm. That's what it's like. These resentments hold us back. They don't hold the other person back, the person, the place, the institution that we resent. And so we have to get to a point in our lives when we let go of those resentments. And that's where I have to live. I have to live a resentment-free life, because I want to stay sober. Because when I'm sober, now I've got a chance to be part of the solution. I get to put back into the stream of life in so many different ways every day. And look, giving forgiveness doesn't cost you a dime. I mean, it's something that's free. I mean, and it's something I would argue that some people with a lot of money can't seem to find their way into, giving a resentment. I mean, getting rid of their resentments. It's not something that is a socioeconomic thing. It's something that has to be an emotional thing that you get to in a place on your own. But you have the choice. It's all back to what we talked about. Right. You have the choice. Do you want to hold on to these things that hold you back in life, or do you want to You want to drop that burden and let it go. I tell people all the time that one of the most important jobs in our society is the custodians, the garbage men, the people that pick up the garbage, right? People that take out the trash. Because if garbage men stop working, let's say that you're in your city right now, if all the garbage men went on strike and they just said, hey, we're not picking up garbage anymore, how long would it take for society to break down? A month, 2 months before people say, hey, I'm not going to live in the city anymore, because no one wants to live in a city where trash is all over the streets, where piles of trash are so high you can't see the houses behind.
I almost lost my mind because I missed the day of the recycle bin and I had to wait 2 more weeks for it. And I was like a lunatic. I mean,
so that's the thing. And so these garbage collectors are the most important, because if they stop doing their job, society will break down. The same thing happens in your life when you don't take out your trash. You have this emotional, spiritual, this mental baggage that you carry around. And if you're not willing to take out that trash, you're going to break down too. And you have to keep our side of the street clean. That's what I tell people all the time. Don't worry about what your neighbors are doing or what everybody else is doing in life, what that car is doing in front of you. Keep your side of the street clean. And that's all you have to do in life.
Yeah. Right. Well, to me that, again, to bring up your coffee bean story, it comes down to your own choices and how going back to how you choose to live. But, there are so many things in life that can keep you stuck or, weigh you down. I often use the Jacob Marley, from A Christmas Carol. He's carrying all this weight. And what would it be to just one brick at a time, like release the weight and truly change? Change is possible and it occurs whether we want it to or not. But it's as things change, what are our choices and how do we want to embrace it so we can live the life that we're truly meant to live and not be weighed down or change as a result of when things get hot.
Yeah.
Well, and as a therapist, we watch. I mean, that's part of why you go to a therapist, is we're good predictors of life. And, so many times I'm telling people, like, you can keep doing this, but there's an end to this game and it isn't a pretty end. I mean, I've seen it. It's somebody in you're going to start using something, drugs, sex, money, fast cars, abusing women. Something's going to go wrong. Alcohol. If you keep going down this path, because you're making choices that are not defining you in ways that are well. And oftentimes I'll have a client come back to me a couple sessions later and say, actually, some of that stuff you said in that is already starting to go wrong. I'm already starting to use and do some of that stuff. And I'm like, yeah, these bad choices, it's a train wreck. I mean, I already see, I can look down the track of life and say there's no tracks and you're headed there and it's going to crash. So we're trying to help, therapists in general are trying to help, like, you get on a track that doesn't have a lot of crashes, that you don't fall into addiction. Because once you fall into it, like, Damon, it is just a dark, slippery slope that eats you alive and puts a lot of people in prison.
Yeah, absolutely. No, 100%. And it all comes down to choices. We have a choice of how we want to handle. Do we choose to be like the carrot that turns soft and sad and weak in the pot of boiling water called life? And you know what? You're going to have carrot days. Those are days that you're sad. Natural human emotion. I have carrot days all the time.
Right.
Then we have the other choice to be like the egg that turns hard in that pot of boiling, that soft liquid inside. Our hearts become hardened off to the world. We become mad and angry and mean and irritable. And you know what? You're going to have egg days. Hell, if you're like me, you're going to have a lot more egg days than you have carrot days. I've got a lot more. I'm a lot more times in that car getting mad at the person cutting me off than I am the carrot. I assure you, I have a lot more egg days than carrot days. But we have that third choice to be like that coffee bean that changes the pot of boiling water into a pot of coffee. And the thing about being a coffee bean is that, hey, I know this, that anytime I want, 9 o'clock in the morning, 9 o'clock at night, I've got this power inside me to start my day over anytime I want. Man, if I'm having a bad day, if I'm having a carrot day or egg day, I can take a step back from life, take a deep breath, and just say, hey, whoa, hang on a second, life. I'm not going to be the carrot today, and I'm not going to be the egg. And then I'm going to run and jump in that pot of boiling water called life and tell life, you know what? Turn it up. I got this. I'm a coffee bean. And the longer the coffee bean sits in the pot of boiling water called life, the stronger the pot of coffee is going to be.
Well, what what a nice wrap up. If you haven't had a chance to read Mr. West's book, Damon West, we've been honored to have you here today.
Yes.
His book, The Coffee Bean, your story, and your book, The Change Agent, is inspirational, truly. And I think it can help an entire world and family begin to heal.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And recover, because that's what we're all in recovery, right? Like we're all kind of in this recovery together. We're
Everybody
all in
is.
steps together, whether it's you or your loved one or your son or daughter or aunt or uncle. We're all in some form of a recovery together.
Absolutely. Everybody's going through something. And Monica kind of touched on this a while ago. That's why it's so important to be kind.
Mm-hmm.
And being kind is a choice. You have to choose to be kind. It's like my wife tells my stepdaughter when she goes to school, she tells Clara, you're smart, you're pretty, you're funny, but the best thing about you, Clara, is that you are kind, because being kind is a choice. You have to choose to be kind. And look, everyone struggles in life. Everybody's going through something. And if the 3 hardest words for people to say are, I need help, the 4 most important words for people to hear, I believe in you. So find someone today and tell them,
Powerful.
I believe in you.
Powerful.
So
Thanks a lot, y'all. I really appreciate the opportunity to spend
thank
time
you,
with you
Damon.
today.
We so appreciate it. We're so blessed to have you on our show today. Thank you.
Thank you.
so
Follow
much,
us
y'all.
on Facebook and Instagram, and look up Damon West. You won't want to miss his stuff. We'll put all of his links on our Facebook posts too.
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you.
Bye now.
Bye.